Welcome to the Around the Republic podcast. I'm your host, Brian Nichols, Associate Editor at the Libertarian Republic, and today I am joined by not one, but two Liberty heroes, TLR Editor-in-Chief Kody Fairfield and TLR contributor Paul Meekins. What's up, boys? What's up, boys?
Hey, Brian, what's going on?
There we go. Kody, how you doing?
I'm doing very well.
Paul, you there?
I am here. Is Paul here?
I am here.
There he is.
There he is.
All right, Paul, Kody, thanks for joining, boys. And you know, really quick before we get started too much, I want to do a great big thank you to all you listeners out there for joining us for this week's podcast. Just a reminder, the Around the Republic podcast is a part of former Libertarian presidential candidate Austin Peterson's Libertarian Republic Empire. So if you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe and share, and be sure to go ahead and check out Austin's podcast as well, which is the Freedom Report, and tell him that we over here at the Around the Republic sent you. Also, feel free to follow us on Twitter. You can find me at bnicholsliberty. You can find Kody at K0D_4. And you can find Paul at Meekin on Movies. So that's going to be the best way to find us. And now we're going to try to do a quick segue here into some pretty tragic news of the week, which is obviously the horrible bombing over in Manchester. Very quick background for the listeners. Turns out that there was an Ariana Grande concert at an arena in Manchester, England. At the very end of the concert, all these concert goers are leaving the concert. What appears to be a suicide bomber, which ISIS has claimed responsibility. He detonates himself with an explosive vest that does have shrapnel that shoots out. Ends up killing, now we're at a death toll of around 22 individuals, including some younger teenagers, some kids, because this is it's Ariana Grande, who is basically Disney Channel. She's still getting that audience, which is horrifying in its own respect. But looking at those who are affected by this, it is pretty tragic. And there are still individuals who are missing. But yeah, pretty somber situation happening over there in the United Kingdom. Kody, you're here. You're getting a lot of the articles coming in right now as the editor-in-chief for the TLR. What has been your reception from everybody putting in articles and just their overall perspective of what's happening right now?
I think the biggest thing is it comes down to it's the shock value is almost gone of these kind of things simply because of what's happened in Paris, what's happened in Belgium, and that's almost unfortunate in the sense that it's become almost expected that at some point something's going to happen. And the answers to those questions become ultimately difficult when you have to balance the ability to decide what the people are capable of and what the government finds necessary in securing these people from events like this. And ultimately what I believe that I can take away from all this is that you just can't protect against crazy. There's nothing you can do in your life to ever guarantee safety 100% of the time. And the biggest thing that I'm realizing in watching the different videos that came in of this event, in watching how people reacted, not only in the moments as it was occurring, but in the moments waning after, is that you should be prepared for a situation, regardless of where you're at, whether it's in a building with hundreds of thousands of people or whether it's with two of your friends at a restaurant. Just kind of be aware of your surroundings and those kind of things. Because ultimately, if something does occur, you want to be, best trained to react to whatever the situation is around you.
Absolutely.
I think the most striking thing about the barbarity that happened in Manchester in the UK this time around is the fact that they are now targeting even softer targets than they were before. Normally they go after targets that are unarmed, where they have security forces, but they're not, especially in Europe, the same type of security forces you'd see here in the United States. But beyond that, now they're going after targets of children, like you mentioned, right? I mean, I think the first casualty that came out of this incident was an 8-year-old girl, and that's among the other 22 who were killed, who are probably, late teens, early adults. And that part to me is just tragic.
And absolutely. I mean, right there, you hit the nail on the head, Kody. Is that it seems like ISIS and ISIS-like sympathizers, in their more recent attacks, especially as of late, they have been directed at those, shall we say, helpless individuals, non-military combative individuals, people who literally have, a complete innocence, if you will, in the world. I mean, they have no qualms whatsoever of worrying about radical Islamic terrorism. They probably don't even know what that means, honestly. Like truly, the gory details of what it is that these people are attacking. They probably, honestly, a lot of these kids, they probably were born around the time, if not after September 11th. So they probably don't even know the background history of it. Now, Paul, you're, shall I say, a recovering liberal, and I'm saying that with all due respect. So a lot of those on the right now are saying, we need to respond to instances like this of Islamic terrorism. If it doesn't, in fact, turn out to be Islamic terrorism, and it appears it's going that way, they're saying that we need to, go ahead and defeat Islamic terrorism. To which a lot of libertarians will say, well, how do you defeat an ideology? So I guess you bring a much more libertarian approach, I am assuming, with regards to foreign policy. So what is your perspective, coming from the left kind of mentality of foreign policy, and looking at what's happening? How would you, go ahead and approach something like this going forward to avoid it from happening in the future?
Yeah, it's tricky because there's a couple of things you can do, and none of them are good. The first, total and utter surveillance state. You're monitoring emails, you're monitoring computers, you're monitoring communications. Anytime someone searches on, ISIS or how to make a bomb or how to make a nail bomb or how to make a suicide vest, immediately sends a flag, immediately got police knocking on your door. Hey, were you searching on this on the internet? That kind of thing. Total and complete surveillance. Because when you look at and the problem with that is when we have had people on like a watch list here in America, it hasn't worked anyway. Like the Orlando nightclub shooting guy, he was being watched by the government and we didn't do anything. So that would imply to me that if we want to stop this kind of thing from happening, we need to be in every single person's stuff, and that is not right. And that's why as tragic as it is, I have to say, this kind of stuff, domestically anyway, I think it's a cost of liberty. I think it's a cost of having the ability to live your life freely and free from surveillance in a police state. And this is the kind of thing that can slip out and can happen because you can't stop crazy. Best thing you can do is try and mitigate it to the best of your ability. And the best way to do that would be a complete and total surveillance state, which no one wants and we shouldn't have. The other way you could do it, I suppose, would be it's an American flag flying somewhere in the Middle East, a massive military presence, like boots on the ground, like we haven't seen since the Korean or Vietnam War. Lots and lots of soldiers weeding it out, and I guess that could help. But at the same time, every time an American kills someone over in the Middle East, that could create 3 more terrorists. So it's a tricky thing, and even worse, it's a suicide bomber. Like in Boston, where I'm from, we had the Boston bomber. I think he killed a couple of people, injured a bunch, ran away. And then the story was the manhunt. We're gonna get this bastard. But here, it's like if you're a terrorist, this is the perfect crime. You get a bunch of people, there is no manhunt. Everyone's left feeling deflated, scared, and they don't know where to go next because you can't go after ISIS for this because ISIS isn't a nation. ISIS doesn't have a leader. It's a homunculus. So it's this really tricky, almost paralyzing thing where any actual answer is going to result in either a sacrificing of our liberties, a sacrificing of a non-aggression principle or a non-interventionist policy when it comes to foreign policy. It's brutal, and hopefully there are people smarter than me at the UN and at the White House and in Europe that know what to do. And I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, what did we do in Syria? We spent however many millions of dollars to blow up the wrong part of an airfield.
Right.
So It's just, gosh, batten down your hatches and thank God for every second you have, because you never know.
And I think you brought up a good point, Paul. I mean, I I think right there with regards to the only answer, air quote answer, is being that has been promoted has been either a attacking a faceless entity, being something like ISIS, that there is no nation to attack, there is no nation of ISIS, there is the entity that is ISIS, that is, it has its fingers all across the globe. But number two, like you said, going ahead and just inflating what we currently have as this horrendous surveillance state. And then I would say, this is just something that I don't think some people will consider, is that if we truly wanted to eradicate Islamic terrorism through a surveillance state, which I am by no means advocating, I think it's a terrible idea. But the only way to truly implement that would to have a global surveillance state under something like a United Nations, where literally there is one governing entity that has its entire its fingers in every single other country's affairs, be it warring countries, be they allied countries, surveilling all their citizens, and then having the ability to have the ability to basically strong arm individual sovereignty of these nations by bypassing those national security presences, because they would be if you will, a federalist type of model where they would have the authority over a sovereign nation. So Kody, what would be your thoughts on that if that were to be the end result?
You mean ultimate authority, like global, almost Illuminati-esque?
The deep state, obviously, yeah.
Oh man, how I would love to be run by the Bilderbergs. No, I would agree with you guys. I think that when you're dealing with this kind of approach, you almost have to take a step back and not look at it like a security versus liberty type situation, because ultimately most people are going to side with security. What you have to look at here is what you're giving up as an individual person for the protections that you're getting, and then the quality of those protections, right? So like in the United States, just for instance, if we're looking at what the government's done in order to protect us from things like 9/11, right? They put up this TSA entity, which is utterly worthless.
So efficient.
Literally stops nothing, right? There has been, bombs have gone onto airplanes, and we were lucky enough they weren't able to be detonated with the underwear bomber. We've had people accidentally bringing firearms. There was a police officer. I live out in California, and there's a police officer from Santa Monica, which is up by LA, and she flew to Japan and forgot or didn't know that she had her firearm, her service pistol, in her bag. Got to Japan, and the government of Japan wasn't going to let her out with a pistol in her bag, and that of all things is just dumb on her part. But at the same time, like, the TSA missed it. The TSA missed completely this carried on firearm. So things like that just don't work. And so it's hard when you sit there, even the people who beg for security, who beg to be protected at every turn, it's hard for me at least to rationalize their thoughts when every time I see a government entity go up and try to do something, it fails. It's very interesting to me that people still think that somebody else is going to protect them in every situation. I've come to the conclusion in my own life, my own experiences, that I want to be aware of everything around me at all times. I want to make sure that I am of the utmost protection for myself and those around me, given whatever situation may occur. Does that take a little more paying attention to nuanced things that are happening around you? Sure, sometimes. I can give you one incident where I was in a movie theater and this guy just didn't look like he would belong. And, so I took action. I asked him what he was doing there. I approached him to make sure that there wasn't something crazier going on. And I can tell you it's the first time in my life that I ever wish I concealed carried. But turns out the guy was hopped up on drugs, snuck into the theater. Nobody knew he was supposed to be there. But that just proves to you, like, the security... nothing is worse than thinking there's security, being lulled into that safety, and then something happening.
Exactly.
Because then nobody is prepared to act. I give this theory quite often, and I had been in the academy to become a police officer out in California, and due to injury, I had to move out of that industry. But one of the things I would always talk about when comparing what cities I wanted to work for was, like, the benefits of working in a city like LA is that you're always on your toes. Everything's always happening. There's always something going on. Now, that's not good in terms of crime rate for a city and where you want to live, but as a police officer, it keeps you sharp to an extent, right? You can make the argument that your skills are kind of up to date. where somebody who works in, say, Beverly Hills may not have the same reaction time to something breaking because they don't have that happen very often. And that's, of course, this is not to be a blanket statement about all police departments. I just make that clear, but it highlights the situation of just because you think there's security doesn't mean you're safe. And oftentimes that lull, that sense of the sense of calm that comes over you by believing there's that security leads you more vulnerable than knowing that in any circumstance you have the right to defend yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that right there, one thing at the Libertarian Republic that we focus on is the idea of personal responsibility. And with that personal responsibility, with that comes your personal safety, not only for yourself, but also the safety of those around you and your immediate family. So a situation like what just happened over in Manchester, while I'm not going to sit here and play, Monday morning quarterback and say, if someone had this, they could have prevented X, Y, and Z from happening. You nailed it right there in the head, Kody, in terms of people walk into these events with this false sense of security thinking, oh, I'm all fine and dandy because there's security here, so I have no need to be concerned. I have no need to worry about someone coming in and doing some horrendous event. I mean, let's rewind back. Let's go to 2012, which it's hard to imagine. It's already 5 years ago, but with Sandy Hook, the school was under this umbrella of false assumptions, being that they have a brand new security system in place, therefore nothing like this could happen. And then Adam Lanza comes in and blows away, dozens of kids, which is just, it's horrifying. But if we'd allowed individuals in the classrooms, like teachers, to be able to have personal responsibility for themselves and their immediate class, instead of relying on these security presences like a school security guard or a police force to come in and respond, not in a proactive manner, but in a reactive manner. I mean, we might have seen how many of these various tragedies throughout our recent history, they could have been avoided. Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, hold on 1 second. There we go. Yeah, so regarding avoiding it, it's tricky. Like, if every single teacher at Sandy Hook had a concealed carry permit, maybe it would have stopped them. But I imagine the second that guy got into the school and the second someone drew a gun on him, his guns would have already been out and he would have been hopped up and ready to go. These other guys would have been in a reactionary mode.
But really quick, I'm going to challenge you on that, Paul. But
okay.
Think if at the very least, I mean, think about it. You have one person who has a weapon who's at least trying to defend themselves and those around them versus a defensive teacher literally getting mowed down and then all the students getting mowed down. I mean, at the very least, you have something of a self-defense that's not the overarching big brother trying to provide this false sense of security. And when it does provide security, provide it very poorly.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you there. What I would say is if we were going to do that, and I know regulation is a dirty word, I would want anyone that carries a gun in a school to pass a accuracy test of some kind.
Absolutely.
Before they, now that's the thing, because in a lot of states you can just go and buy a gun. Aha, I got a gun, and then someone goes to shoot. And if you're not ready, if you're don't have that thing handled, and you don't know how to double tap or something, which is a term I learned in a Tom Clancy novel, you're going to miss, and then you're a target. And worse, you could hit someone else, because it's not like the movies. Bullets ricochet, bullets hit other things, and it could make a bad situation worse.
Well, here's what I would say too, and not to interrupt you there, Paul, but the other situation is now we're looking at a hard target versus a soft target, right? We are now decentivizing the want to walk into a place where there may not be somebody armed. Even if not a single teacher was armed, the option to be armed could be a deterrent for somebody to go somewhere else. That, again, doesn't mean it's going to prevent it at every location. That doesn't mean that every person is going to want to carry a firearm. But it could mean that maybe they make the decision not to shoot up a school. Maybe they go somewhere where there is more training, where there is, because they just don't know. And obviously that's a hypothetical. It's something that's it's unprovable simply because it's an unprovable situation. The other side of that would be that anybody who owns a firearm is beholden to the personal responsibility thereof, right? If you decide that you are going to be responsible enough, that you think you're responsible enough to carry this firearm, I don't know that I would go in as far as regulating that you have to have this shooting, but any intelligent person would say, I'm going to know how to use this firearm before I go. Otherwise, it makes you no better than anybody else who's just wielding, undaringly for no reason, right? Like, I would assume that if your best interest is in protecting the children, protecting yourself in those kind of situations, that yes, you would go.
You'd want to know how to use it. Yeah.
Training. Correct.
Right, but I'm saying like this is again like personal responsibility is really important. I'm not sure how much I trust the general populace to be personally responsible to the point that we need them to be.
Yeah. No, I understand that. And that would be a pragmatic approach that I would take to that. I would say, okay, that's fine. If you especially in a public setting, because most schools are going to be public settings, I wouldn't have an issue with somebody saying, and this is going to get me roasted with probably, those ANCAPs out there. Liberty Hangout's going to come on my grill.
Bring it.
There is a pragmatic approach here, and it doesn't. We're not talking arming everybody to the teeth like we're going to war.
Yeah, we're not going to the extremes of everybody having a nuke or a tank. Like
right, but
we get that.
I would to make that argument that if there is a right to life, there is also a right to defend that life with any means necessary.
Exactly. Have you guys heard of Michael Wood Jr.?
No.
He's a former Baltimore police officer, and he always talks about, either gun control or like what cops need to do to better outreach to the community. And he has a similar thing regarding guns. He's like, these are very bad in the wrong hands, and if you're going to own one, you need to have a responsibility, and to that effect, you need to prove that responsibility in a way. And I know that's very liberal lefty, but like I heard it the other day, I'm like, okay, that's something I think people could get behind, when it comes to gun ownership, weapon ownership, pragmatism. No one wants to take away your AR. Well, I guess people do want to take away your AR.
I live in California. I know for a fact they want to take my AR, and I also know for a fact they don't know what an AR is.
Yeah, well, it's some sort of assault rifle, right? It's used in all these terrible crimes, and as a result, it's not the person killing people; it's the gun all by itself. Because as we found out in Manchester, you can only commit mass atrocities with firearms. So it's brutal, and when it comes to any sort of defense, it's always a tricky subject and really hard to get anyone to have a conversation about that you don't already agree with or are prone to agree with, because emotions are so high, and people think gun, they think death, because that's a gun is designed to protect you by making its function
it's a lethal weapon. It's a lethal weapon. I mean, the idea is to kill what is ever trying to kill you, and vice versa. Yeah.
So when they say it's a tool, I'm like, well, I don't know. A spoon can do a bunch of things. A knife can do a bunch of things. A gun can do 2 things. It can be a paperweight. Okay, 3 things. It can be a paperweight, make you look cool, and hurt someone. Like.
Oh, Paul. Okay, so yes, that's all. This has been a great conversation. I want to kind of segue back to Manchester. But that was a fun little path we went down there. Yeah. But one thing that I've seen, especially from those talking heads on the right, in response to what happened in Manchester, is the waving the flag, saying this is why we cannot have refugees from these Middle Eastern states. I saw a report that the guy who blew himself up was a son of Libyan refugees. And this whole, I don't want to say it's nationalism, because I think that the emotion of the moment has clouded some people's ability to think rationally. But with that being said, this notion of stopping these refugees from coming into the more predominantly Western Europe, but also into America, that's come back up again in full force, like it did after the attacks in Paris back during the election. So I guess I'll go to you, Kody. What are your thoughts in terms of being a libertarian, trying to say we get flack all the time for being quote unquote open borders. And I know Austin has taken a different approach in terms of being the Ellis Island approach to immigration. Would you apply something like that for refugees? Like, what's your thoughts being a pragmatic libertarian, shall we say?
I tend to agree with Austin on this principle. Now, that's not to say anybody who supports open borders does not support open borders in the sense that there's a welfare program waiting for people to come take.
The Ann Coulter false narrative that she says
correct.
Every single time she argues with a libertarian.
if you listen to Ann Coulter for anything, you're just gonna get dumber by the minute. But yeah, you can't. You obviously. So if you anybody who I know who advocates open borders always gets stuck in this dichotomy of like it's either open borders now or closed borders today. Like there's only those two options, and that's just utterly not the case. It's much more nuanced than that. But in terms of like what I see as a responsible approach, I do like the Ellis Island where you go through that drug screening because it's not going to be good to bring people who are here who are diseased, and I think you do need to have some sense of who these people are, the same way that you would if you went to another country, right? Now I don't think you need to surveil them beyond finding out. Like there should. I hate talking about the subject because it is not my forte. But I do feel like when you're coming to another country, especially in a time of war, whether this is described as a time of war or not, there is a pseudo war of ideology going on, and there is obviously a continuing issue across the world that does deserve recognition. So I would think that there needs to be some kind of approach, whether that's Ellis Island or some other kind of, variation thereof. I couldn't tell you because again, I would be naive to think that I have the exact answer there. I'm not involved in foreign policy, and unfortunately as a citizen, it's hard to understand a lot of the foreign policy stuff simply because you only get a quarter of the information.
Right.
You only get as much as they can give you, and
Absolutely.
sometimes not even that. So it is a tough issue, and it's not black and white.
And and this is something that I've gotten flack for by those of us in the Freedom Ninja group of Austins, where I fully am I believe in there are borders. I mean, that's just the reality of the world, and we have to stop looking at things through our learned book type of mindset where we're saying, well, there shouldn't be borders. Well, okay, that's great. But right now, we do have borders. We are the United States of America. We have defined borders. That's what makes us not only just a nation, but also a state. We are a sovereign state. And with that, the United States, as per our Constitution, has in the Constitution the role of the government to protect its citizens. And with that, I firmly believe that includes protecting us from potential harms or threats from outside, realms, be they foreign nations, or in this case, individuals from nations that can cause harm to Americans. Now, Trump's gotten a lot of flack because of the quote-unquote Muslim ban, where, we can't restrict people based on their religion and the likes. But I don't see an issue, honestly, with regards to the, picking various countries saying, there's issues happening in Syria. There's issues happening in, Jordan, or you name the country, Libya. We're going to heavily restrict immigration from these countries, and with that, heavily vet these individuals coming into our country. I see no issue with that. I know that the ANCAP wet dream is to have, and honestly, the left-wing liberal dream is to have the borders open so porous that you can move back and forth as you please. But unfortunately, in the world we are in right now, and this is the argument that we have a lot with communists, is that, well, you want your utopia. Well, ANCAPs want their utopia, where this is, we have the porous borders, people can come back and forth as they please. But then you open up situations like this to happen because people aren't properly vetted to come into the nation because they aren't our citizens. And I know that we should be the citizens of the world, but that's not how we are as a society nowadays. So, I mean, Paul, you're coming from, like I said, the left side, from your past. You've probably faced this on your side. What are your thoughts in terms of having to deal with immigration, or more respectively, refugees from these countries? Because it is an issue, and it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, it is an issue, and it's not an easy answer. And I hope my girlfriend isn't listening because I'm about to compliment Donald Trump. So when the immigration ban first happened, I think it was the version 1. One of the aspects of it is that was a temporary ban, except for a couple of countries that were indefinitely. That was like the thrust of it. But during that ban, that temporary ban, I think it was 180 days or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
The plan was to come up with a comprehensive immigration reform package. Take all these resources that are dedicated to processing visas, interviewing people, vetting them, however we currently vet them, and turn them in on themselves to figure out the best way to do this. A temporary freeze, you figure everything out, and then you start up the engines again. A tune-up, if you will, for INS. Unfortunately, that didn't happen the first time, and it appears to have not happened the second time. And I think that's what we need. We need some sort of ability to go, okay, hold on, wait a minute, hold on. Let's figure this out. We need to sit down. We need like, give us 5 minutes to figure this stuff out, And it's hard to do when there are people continuously coming in. There's a continuous change in foreign policy, where our enemies are. Now they're in Syria, before they're in Iraq, then they're in Pakistan. Our current Middle Eastern boondoggle began when we thought Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan. So we went in there a little bit, and then we didn't find him. And then we went into Iraq for some reason, and then we found him in Pakistan. So it's constantly evolving and constantly changing, and we need smart people to figure out this plan. And for those smart people in immigration to figure out that plan, they need time to put the halt on everything so they can implement it in a smart way, which didn't happen the first time.
And let's just take a step back. Our boondoggle of the Middle East, let's be real, started in 1946 after World War II.
That's another thing I was going to say is because we were speaking about how do we stop this kind of terrorism, and like one of the things that like I will give President Obama credit for is during one of his foreign tours, I think he ended up going over to Egypt or somewhere, and he apologized for screwing over Iran, and he apologized for screwing over Afghanistan, and I thought that was really cool.
And then he proceeded to drone the hell out of them, probably.
That was going to be my next point. I'm like, it's nice on paper, but then you're dropping all these bombs, actual bombs on people. A lot of them are probably citizens, or a lot of them could be children, and then you're shocked when someone says, "Oh, I'm going to give it to you a little bit. You've been breaking my bones, and now I'm going to bloody your nose," and you're shocked that this is happening. It's tricky in that, I think it was Malcolm X that said chickens come home to roost. This isn't quite chickens coming home to roost, but I think it's some eggs cracking.
I think that was Louis Farrakhan.
Was it? No, Louis Farrakhan said it was really bad. That's what got Malcolm X in a bunch of trouble, and then he left the Nation of Islam and started his own thing. And then Louis Farrakhan killed him. Well, got people.
Oh, Paul went there. Okay.
Paul went there.
So,
and it's a 4-hour movie. Spike Lee did it. It was really good. I tend to believe that, man.
Speaking of movies to watch right now, go on to Netflix. There's a Roger Stone documentary. I've heard that it's nothing but fascinating.
Awesome.
I mean, Roger Stone, he's not a guy that I will go ahead and idolize by any stretch of the imagination, but what a hell of a life he's had. I mean, he basically went from, young gun, 20-something brainchild to basically being the backbone to Watergate to...
I'm going to push back on the brainchild part. He's not an intelligent human being. He somehow weaseled his way into every space he got.
But that's intelligent. I mean, he's able to manipulate situations to benefit himself, and in most cases, I mean, he kind of benefits other people around him. But, I mean, that, in my opinion, requires intelligence because he is able to get himself into these situations that benefit him primarily, but neither here nor there. We are at the point in the podcast where we do have to start wrapping up, so I do want to give one last, final thought for each of you guys. Paul, let's start with you. Final thought, Manchester, go.
Compassion, I think. I know that's a very lefty thing to do, but like the worst thing we can do right now is, and we're going to do it anyway, is politicize it. I think Cosmopolitan put up an article about a Muslim taxi driver who was taking free fares the entire night after the event.
It was actually a Sikh.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, I get what they're trying to do, and they're trying to say, let's not get insane about the Islamophobia, and we shouldn't. We should tackle whatever the problem is. And if it is Islam, in that regard, we should talk about the facets of Islam that are the problem, because there are a lot of problems with whatever religion or belief we subscribe to that we have to reconcile and in some cases jettison. There are a lot of people on like Dave Rubin's podcast or other places that are, Muslim, and they talk about these aspects of the society that need to be, jettisoned for them to carry on, and
or at the very least, very, very strongly reevaluated.
Yeah, and that's really hard to do in the midst of, how are you going to get time to reevaluate your religion when it's all you can hold on to, when there are literally bombs dropping out of the sky silently from the most prosperous and allegedly welcoming nation on earth, and on the flip side, how do we tackle a problem that's ultimately a holy war? They have God on their side. We do not fight, or we haven't fought with that level of gumption
Fervor.
in a
Yeah.
very long time. You know, the war in Iraq, we were fighting a holy war with military weapons with a bunch of people who probably didn't want to be there that much after a while. And that's why we kept getting into trouble there. That's why we had to have a massive troop surge. We can't win you with ideology, we're going to win you with firepower. And that's such a crummy thing to have to think about, but
Indeed.
that's my down moment for the day.
Kody, final thoughts. Manchester, go.
I'm going to piggyback off of some of the things that Paul said in the circumstance that we can't get caught up in this Muslim hysteria and just blame blanket statement everyone. I think that we have to look at this as an ideology thing. There are issues, clearly, as Paul mentioned, with some of the tenets inside of the ideology. And I think that has to do with a lack of reformation within inside of this religion. I think we've seen reformation within the other two large religions that just hasn't occurred yet. And we have to remember that. I mean, take that with a grain of salt, because I don't mean to minimize the effect of what's happening in the world, but we have to take into account that it is a younger religion than most, especially when you look at the Judeo-Christian religions. Now, I think the other thing that we need to start doing, and this kind of kowtows to not just this incident, but other incidents as well, we need to start looking at things on an individual basis. If it's a crime committed, it's the individual who committed the crime. If it's a terrorist attack, it's the individual or group of individuals who committed the terror attack. So in this instance, it would be ISIS that we're looking at, and clearly that's where we should be focusing, not the entirety of the Muslim population. And that goes with anything. Like if you worked at a company, right, and you had some malfeasance there, and the company, most people don't blame the company for one crazy person. They blame the individual for being that crazy person. The company then takes care of that person, and the problem's typically solved. Now, it's not that simple in this circumstance, but I think that we need to look at the world through a prism of individuality and isolate incidences through that individual and work up from there, not start at the entire population and work down. I think when we do that, we alienate people who could be allies. We stifle any chance of reformation by, again, those same allies being pushed away. But I also think that we take away from what is most important in people, and that's being able to humanize each other. Because when you can't humanize people, you don't care what happens to anybody else. And I think that's where a lot of this stress and fervor is coming on between not just, Muslims and non-Muslims, not just between Democrats and Republicans, but just everyday conversations. I think that the biggest thing is we need to start looking at each other like humans again. And I think that there is a lot of growth that can be made just with that point.
And you just set me up for my final point so well. And it's not anything focusing on Islam or terrorism. It's focusing on not being a complete douche like David Leavitt last night, who tweeted,
Yep.
and I quote, in all caps, multiple confirmed fatalities, now no more caps, at Manchester Arena. The last time I listened to Ariana Grande, I almost died too. Mind you, this is happening as people are still trying to figure out if their loved ones are safe or not. And then, with the audacity 2 hours later to tweet, sorry for offending, didn't realize the magnitude of the tragedy. I always make stupid jokes about whatever's trending. Condolences to families. Now, the absolute BS meter that is skyrocketing up right now in saying I didn't realize the magnitude of the tragedy when literally in his first freaking tweet in all caps was multiple confirmed fatalities. I'm sorry, but F this guy and F anybody who tries to defend him. I'm all for people being, making jokes and being politically incorrect. It's your right. But dear God, show some freaking respect and just stop, because there is this line, and I'm not sure if you guys follow Steven Crowder at all, but his guy that is with him, Not Gay Jared, he
Yep.
tweeted out something that was very accurate, and he's like, there is a fine line, and good comedians know when not to cross that line, and that was a line that you don't cross, especially when it's happening. I mean, that would be like someone making a 9/11 joke as the towers are still standing on fire. Like, you just don't do that. So my final thought of the week is don't be a douche like David. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this week's podcast. And to you guys out there listening, thank you for joining us. And don't forget, now this is something that's we're going to start doing every week, and that is a little plug that 4 out of 5 dentists recommend around their public podcasts and liberty and freedom. Take that to the bank. Until next time, I'm your host, Brian Nichols. We will talk to you guys next week.